interview, Jeremy. We're going to talk about remakes as in general, as a concept, as a way of, as in terms of how they are so prevalent in the industry at the moment and how we feel about them, their pros and cons, and what some of our favorites are.
Yeah. As a concept and as a product.
Yes, definitely. And this sort of brought about because there's been a bit of chatter about this recently, but I think it's pretty prescient that there is a lot of remakes coming soon that have come out recently in the last few years, and that like we're getting this year and that we can look forward to, or that are billed as big items and stuff like that. So it bears examining, I think. And I mean, obviously, because we're going to do the discussion. I think maybe we should start with just sort of defining the terminology we're going to use, and this is just this probably won't be news to anyone listening, but just so we're across it and we've laid this out here right now. We're going to talk about the difference between what a remake and a remaster is. Yeah,
because there's some assumed knowledge, and I think it is worth just pointing out that I think like a remake is them building the game again from the beginning, right? Like that might include redesigns, that might include changes, that might include
new content.
Yeah, like new content, like different decisions being made about the same game. Like a remake is kind of like a reboot of a film. You know, when a film comes around and it gets rebooted, it's usually different. You know, they don't want to do the same movie again. They're like, they're going to do different shots. They're going to have different music and different settings, some different lighting and all that stuff, right?
Different decisions from the actors.
Yeah, of course. Like a remake is not dissimilar to like a reboot in that regard, whereas a remaster is usually like it's the same game running in the same engine with new graphics, running on new hardware. There might be a couple of quality of life changes, like either like higher frame rate or better audio or different UI or different buttons or like slightly different camera controls are usually the go-tos.
But it's like they've taken the existing project files and adapted them and added to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And then a port is like the old game running on new hardware.
Yeah, just making it run on new system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To port
Something
across.
I will say, yes. Something I will say with that reboot to remake comparison, I feel there's more license with a reboot to do something different than there usually is typically with a remake. You know what I mean? I feel like if you're getting a remake of something, although, Final Fantasy VII is sort of flying in the face of this, but if you're getting a remake of something, you're getting the same thing made today for the most part.
I think yes, but I also think the only reason we think that is because games don't get rebooted very often. And when they do, they are usually a different game.
For sure. It's just that, when I think of modern reboots, something that the first thing that pops to mind for me right now is God of War. And that was sort of that's a blurred line because that's like
it's a
pseudo sequel reboot.
Yeah.
Because they haven't discarded any of the previous lore and mythology.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe God of War. Is it's a reboot of the franchise,
right?
Like as opposed to it's not a reboot of the first God of War.
Not the story.
Well, at all the first God of War, right? It's like it's not the same gameplay, it's not the same location, same characters, same story, right? It's like it's not the first God of War at all, aside from Kratos is there.
Yeah, it's just continuous. So yeah, it's just to sort of lay that foundation there.
Yeah.
Our first sort of discussion point here is, how do you feel about remakes overall? How do we feel about it? I feel like it's a very complicated knot to untangle.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
I didn't think it was going to be until right that second when I had to think about it. You know what I mean?
When you thought about the answer, you're like,
oh shit.
Look, I think I enjoy I enjoy most kinds of remakes, but I enjoy the kind of remake, and this is going to be a very Jeremy answer. I enjoy the kind of remake where they get to do a different twist on a thing that's already known. So like a reimagining of what it means to be property X, Y, Z.
Mm-hmm. So, do you want to get the playlist going?
Oh yeah, we got video to go on.
We got trailers to just go on the video, so you're not missing out on too much audio. But if you want to see projects that are relevant to the discussion, they'll be up on the video feed.
Yeah. I think that like a good example of that would be Pokemon. Actually, okay. I think Pokemon Let's Go is a really good reimagining and a pseudo remake of the original Pokemon games. Because I think that one specifically has a really good. It's the same story as the original game. A lot of the mechanics are the same, but it's sort of like it asks the question like, what does it mean to catch a Pokemon in a Pokemon game? And I think that does a really good job of sort of answering that, while still changing it. But also the originals are still there, right? I think like remakes, to me, the most important thing a remake can do is change what it means to be that series, and also introduce people who are not currently fans of a series into a series. So if Pokemon Let's Go was someone's first Pokemon game, that would be a really good entry into the series to allow you to then go back and play some of the others, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's fair enough.
I think that's what I like about remakes.
Sure. Okay.
I don't like them when they don't understand. But we'll get there.
Well, yeah, I think it's very easy for someone to for a developer or a publisher to decide to create a remake because the original is so much like goodwill and cachet with the public. And the decision informed by that sort of motivation pretty quickly becomes and feels pretty hollow. I feel.
Remakes are more often than not very safe. And they also are it's a very easy way to get like honestly like cheap goodwill. Yep.
And you see that a lot with remasters, right? Like,
yes.
Oh, Dishonored did well, but it was at the end of this console generation. Let's people said it had performance issues. Let's put it on the new hardware. Like in 2014 when we got so many games being remastered for PS4 and Xbox One.
Yeah.
A lot of that was like, oh, we need new thing on new console. It's just the old thing, but you're going to buy it because maybe you didn't play it before or you really liked it.
Yeah.
You're relying on the goodwill of the audience that you've cultivated so far to sort of propel you forward. And that's really like cynical, you know, and it sort of it's sort of like mining the oil. I'm lost in the terminology, but it's like wringing this little bit of content, this bit of product that you can, wringing it dry until there's nothing left.
Yeah,
and maybe you should have just gotten something different, or tried something different, or taken a bit of risk. That said, like it is. The problem is it works, and they can make those decisions because some part of me and some part of millions of other people does just want to enjoy old thing is new again.
Yes.
Which is, you know, it's backwards, and it's not enough for us to put our combined efforts into sort of like or ethically sometimes. It's like I don't want to do this the most. I would rather be doing other things. I don't want to keep seeing Ghostbusters movies that rely on what came before. I want to see them do something different.
Yeah.
I want to. You sort of get stuck in a loop at some point.
Yeah, and you know, I think, in my opinion, like Nintendo is the worst offender of that, where they will just resell the same thing, like just over and over and over again,
Yeah. Yeah, they'll give you ports and remasters and remakes, and all of them will be a bit sort of hollow in some way.
Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, the way the different companies handle that is a good distinction to point out. You don't see that many from Xbox, really.
No.
Not full remakes. The biggest version of that we did get was Halo 1 and 2 with their anniversary editions.
Yeah.
They got completely overhauled on the same engine, stuff like that. But yeah, when you look at PlayStation and when you look at Nintendo, you can definitely see that sort of cynical, hey, there's an anniversary of this. We know millions of people bought this already. We know millions of people are going to buy it again. Let's just get it out. So yeah, it's an interesting push and pull of like, yeah, I'll play this thing again if you release it. And why are you only focusing on this? I want you to do something different. When you released this originally, it wasn't the classic that it is today.
Yeah.
I want you to do that again.
Yeah.
Sam is saying, did you mute or is it me? Are we muted on stream?
We were muted and I don't know why.
Were we muted on the recording?
Yeah. I don't know what happened that caused that to happen.
How long has that been, I wonder?
Hopefully not too long. But also we've got our separate recording, so the podcast will be fine.
Yeah, so the recording is fine. Sorry, Twitch chat. Sorry we were muted.
Yeah, I might have accidentally clicked it.
So yeah. You messaged immediately when you muted. Okay, cool. How do we feel about changes? So how do you feel, Jeremy, when they do take something and they do make something a bit different, when they do remix it, or they do make either an artistic decision that changes maybe the tone of a scene, or they make a story decision that changes outcomes for what might have happened for a different character? How do you feel about that?
I have opinions, Kerry.
Good.
I have opinions on this.
Well, this is the place for them.
I think that when they do it from a way of improving the tone, perhaps fixing an error, or doing it in such a way that means that the scene or the game is amplified in a way, I think that's a good change. Okay. So, for example, I think Final Fantasy VII does that a lot. There's a lot more things happening in that game now, right? Obviously, Final Fantasy VII Remake is an extreme version of what Final Fantasy VII was, which was a turn-based, RPG from 1997.
Yeah.
And now it's a fully fledged action combat, counter action game.
Based on only the first 5 hours.
Yeah, right. I think that the move away from turn-based was like, I don't know if it was a risk, because I think that they've been good at that game for a long time. But I think it was still a decision that they would have had to think about and go are we gonna make our premier title an entirely different genre of gameplay?
And I think it's really to its benefit. One of the games I downloaded on PlayStation Plus was 7, the original, the remastered, I guess, on PS4. And that game is slow.
Yeah, it is. It's slow. It's a 25-year-old game.
Yeah. The combat is so sluggish. You just sit there and watch as your bar fills up. And the enemies get to attack you in the meantime. You're just waiting.
Yeah.
I'm so glad they gave you... Because there's elements of the ATB there.
It's literally called the ATB, still in there.
But you get to do so much more in the meantime while you're waiting. And you get to charge it up faster with your different actions. And
yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas, I think, the idea that you change the style and feeling of a game for the sake of just straight fidelity, I feel like can often, if you're not careful, and look, it's a very hard balance. If you're not careful, you can lose part of the feeling of the game. Shadow of the Colossus is on screen right now. I think that's a really good example of adding fidelity and still keeping the tone and the vibe of the game, of the original.
Keeping it intact.
Yes, like the original intention of Shadow of the Colossus is still definitely there. Whereas for like I'll use Mass Effect as an example, even though I personally haven't played the original Mass Effect. Looking at some screenshots and some comparisons, there were plenty of times where I'm sitting here going like, while the new one looks shinier and is shinier, the original was sort of like going for a thing. Like it was trying to hit like a striking image or a tone, which gets, for me, quite lost. Halo 1 Remake, I think, is a really good example of that, where like I feel like they lose a lot of the personality in a lot of the world design to make things look more detailed. But they lose, like the intention then gets muddied there. I honestly think that the Halo remakes are some of the best, specifically because of their swap back and forth nature of it, where like you get the original game as well. The exact same
totally,
time.
which is a really unique way to do it. And I think it's something that we're not going to see that often.
No.
Because it generates that, it allows everyone to make the comparison at the press of a button.
Yes.
And it turns out it can be an incredibly divisive thing to remake something that some people, or maybe thousands or millions of people, really love and really care for. And they're the people who are going to buy the remake. They're the people who want to get it again and see what else you've done to it.
And Halo is also a very specific example where those games still play really well for the most part, so that you can run those old games on that old engine and it's still great.
Yeah.
Like you're still going to have a great time. And also people are so intricately familiar with every aspect of that engine that, you know, if you fuck with that, people are going to know. So that like you running it on the old one is the safest option. But yeah, like having both options for graphics is like it's the thing about, you know, if you compare yourself to something that's better than you, like then you're doing something wrong. And like it's tough, right? It's tough to do that. It takes an amount of humility, I think, to say like, hey, if you don't want all of this work that we put in, if it's just not your jam, your game from 2001 is still there. And yeah, like not many games I think are confident enough to do that. And I also don't think most games work that way, because, you know, you can't swap between the old graphics and the new graphics of Final Fantasy VII, for example.
No, well, yeah, that would be impossible.
Yes,
because
it's just an entirely different video game at that point.
It's fundamentally different. It has been remade.
Yeah.
And completely reinterpreted in some ways. And yeah, it's so exponentially different.
Yeah.
But also the same. Yeah, 7 Remake is such an interesting version of this.
Yeah, it's almost like God of War in that sense, where it's like you are doing everything different almost, aside from the structure of the story is the same, but even then it's changing.
Yeah. Although, yeah, we only knew that the structure of the story was changing when we got to the end of it.
No,
even
but
when
like
we thought it was...
The first time the ghosts come up is pretty early, though, and they're not in the game at all.
True, but it's pretty unclear about what the hell that is. But
Sure.
That's a good point. But even when it is just even if they're not fucking with the story like they are going to, seemingly, even if they aren't fucking with the story, like the game is so different.
Yes.
You know, it would be like if you tried to remake literally Super Mario Brothers in 3D. Not what does Mario look like in 3D, but what does it mean when you take the 1985 Super Mario Brothers and make it a 3D game? Like,
Yeah.
how do you make that work? I don't know how you would.
I mean, like, that's Mario 64 though, isn't it?
Yes and no.
Yeah,
Yes and no.
yeah, I know what
It's
you mean.
it's better than that answering that question. Them saying this is how you do a 2D game. Adding a third dimension is like
Yeah.
it's you can't just try and translate that. It wouldn't work that way.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they went that route with 7 Remake here, because they modernized it in so many ways to where it is now. It's not only a classic game, the original, but now we've got our hands on a modern classic as well.
Yeah.
And that's really impressive. In terms of changes, I've never been one to really be that bummed by it. Like I've said before recently on the show, I think this came up. We were talking about how we brought up like the Mass Effect examples and stuff like that, and how it feels like, or maybe it wasn't recently on the show, but it at least was on the Discord, where it feels like to me sometimes that Jeremy's is looking out for those tonal differences if assets have been remade and stuff like that, and kind of feels like it's hard to please Jeremy sometimes. Like if I bring up a discussion point, Jeremy's like, "Oh, this looks off, this looks different, this doesn't look right."
I'm granted a lot more critical on remakes and remasters. Like I'm maybe, like, to go a step further, I'm a lot more cynical when it comes to them, because I have less faith, I think, that they are doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, and honestly, that's totally valid and fair. And I'm quite forgiving and optimistic, I guess, in that regard. I'm kind of just like, oh yeah, it looks a little different, but I like the resolution. I like the texture resolutions better. Like I'm pretty easy to please in a lot of ways.
Sure.
Like with the Mass Effect example, for one thing. Like I'm just kind of glad they did as much work on one as they did, because man, that's a 2006 like early Xbox 360 game. Like that the original game is a little rough.
Yeah, like it looks ugly in a lot of places.
Totally. But yeah, I don't mind license, I guess, for developers to make something as good as they can based on their judgment at the time. I have faith, and I have and I have a bit of trust that they're doing their best.
Yeah, like I think when I'm critical of them, I don't think that I don't think that they're not doing their best. I think.
Sure. Yes. I didn't mean to put words in your mouth.
Yeah. No. I think it's just more that I feel like a lot of the time it's not. Maybe it's just not coming from the right place, or there's just maybe a lack of, maybe a lack of direction, right? Because I think there might be an assumption on some of these projects that you don't need a voice to recreate a game, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, the game's already there. You don't need to decide anything. Just make it look better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very
just press
easy.
The up-res button.
Exactly. And it's very easy to accidentally make it worse. A really good example, I think, is the Grand Theft Auto remakes they brought out recently.
Oh, the trilogy, yeah.
Where I couldn't believe...
A lot of people said not even good remakes, but...
Yes, right, yeah. Like, beyond that stuff, it was literally put through just a 3D model up-resing software, and jokes were getting ruined, models were worse, and I remember, like, you and I disagreed immediately on does this look better or worse? And you were saying it looks better, and I was saying it looks worse. And then there were things like there's like an auto shop which is called like Nut or something, and it was like a big
bolt. Didn't they do like a lot of like texture upscaling, like AI texture upscaling or something?
Yeah, and it ruined, like it introduced spelling mistakes because they didn't check it. But the nut that was on top of the building.
Oh yeah, like an octagonal nut that you use in mechanical work.
Got turned into a donut. It got turned into a rounded object, which is just not the joke. That was a really egregious one, to the point where they took it down, right? They stopped you from being able to buy it. And
Yeah, that whole thing was. I mean, it had performance issues and
everything about it was fucked.
Yeah, it was so bad.
Um,
And that's where that cynicism is well founded in an example like that. 100%.
Yeah, and like my concern is that happens a lot. It's the same argument with the Resident Evil. Sorry, the Resident Evil on the screen. The Silent Hill remaster, where they were like, "Hey, guess what? Like this fog was here so that they didn't have to render so many polygons. Let's remove the fog." And like, oh, cool, the atmosphere's gone.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it turns out a lot of these like video decisions based on graphics also had a design reason about it. It would be
totally.
It would be like if they made the first Crash Bandicoot levels in a straight line because they can render the whole level at once.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. When you're designing around limitations, maybe you should still honor those limitations. Those design decisions made around those limitations, even if the limitations aren't there already. Or aren't there again.
Got to keep the soul.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got the Resident Evil 2 remake trailer on screen. And this is a series that's been so remade when you look back on its history. Resident Evil 1, 4 was remastered.
And now there's a remake of 4.
There's a remake of 4 coming next year. Remakes of 2 and 3 came out over the last 3 years that were very well received.
3 not as much, but I think 3 is still like just a game that not as many people like.
Yeah, I think it was kind of short, and they charged a lot for it as well. So that was sort of like a publishing issue at that point.
Right.
But with 2, people really liked it, and again, that was another
really
sort
good
of thing, like Final Fantasy VII Remake, where they really took a lot of steps to modernize it, and they did introduce. That's a game where you talk about bringing things up to fidelity and potentially losing tone. You played the game at all? I haven't played it at all, but you played it. Would you say that it's pretty? They've managed to keep a foreboding and harrowing and horrific tone, like
100%. And beyond that, they even recreated some of the cutscenes almost shot for shot into, and did the same jump scares, the same like eerie quietness at the exact same moments. They recreated what it was like to feel what that game would have been like to play for the first time, while
they
making
didn't just remake the assets; they remade the moments.
Yes, which is it's really hard to do that. Like they did a really good job because it's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah. So we've got another prompt here. It says why remakes are important and where does a remake fit into the legacy of a product in general. Sort of touching on game preservation issues and things of that nature. It definitely speaks to, like, some people I think would say why a remake is important is because it keeps it modern, it keeps it available, it keeps it accessible. But I think that really does speak to why game preservation is important at the moment and how difficult it is to get your hands on things that aren't properly kept on hand for you to be able to access when you need to.
Yeah.
Game preservation is something that many people are working on. Lots of independent efforts to catalog games and games media from an old age, like magazines and stuff like that. Keep the hardware on board. There are so many of the NES and SNES cartridges. They've all got batteries in them, and all the batteries are starting to die.
Yeah.
And the contacts are starting to wear off, and people have lost game files from earlier back in the day. So there's a real effort being made by a lot of people who aren't the main developers to help
I think
things in check, because
we could be a little bit more fair.
There's not many visible efforts for publishers and developers, I think, to maintain that stuff, I think is fair to say.
Yeah, I think to be maybe a little bit fairer, it's specifically the publishers and the owners of the companies that own the studios, because it's the big wigs. They're not interested in preservation. That doesn't make them money, right? So
yeah, they're not there for the artistic medium. They're there for the. And to be fair, like people who I'm sure, like cataloging efforts for film and movies and TV. I'm sure a lot of those aren't backed by big studios and Fox and.
Weirdly,
or am I wrong?
So yes and no. Some companies yes, some companies no. It's different though because they have an immediate financial reason to do that, right?
Why's that?
So, well, because you don't need to buy an old TV to watch an old movie.
Okay.
They can just always sell that thing, so they always have a reason to preserve it.
Right.
They keep the old tapes so they can always remaster the films later. There was
Whereas with early games and stuff like that, you have to sort of adapt them and work on them to allow them to fit new technology, right?
Yeah. It is easier. Like what is harder for film companies is to keep the original roles in a like original canisters of film in like climate controlled environments, because there have been fires in the past which have wiped out stuff, and if it was filmed on cassette, I know weirdly a lot about some of this stuff. Like if it was filmed on cassette, for example, it's harder to bring forward because the original quality was already bad. But a lot of, for example, in Star Trek Next Generation, it was filmed on cassette, but it wasn't actually filmed on cassette. It was filmed on film and then immediately transferred to cassette. And so for a long time, they were like, we can't ever remaster this show because it was filmed on a VHS because it was the early like 90s or something.
Yeah.
Or 80s or something, and it was like,
Then they found the reels.
They found the reels, and they were able to go back, but that meant they had to recut it.
Oh,
Yeah, it was, and it ended up being a mammoth job, but they did it and they sold it, and it's like wonderful. But like, yeah, they had to recut the original copies of it.
it's like all those sitcoms from the early 2000s that didn't adapt to HD or widescreen.
Yeah, right. All of the ones that are still
like
4:3.
New series that started around those times did. So Scrubs was like 4:3 until like 2008,
And then they
while
changed.
Arrested Development started in 2004 in widescreen.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So in terms of games, it's it's hard. I think
It is hard.
something like the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, I think, is a really good example of that's a remaster, to be fair, with some very heavy remastering going into the original game because it really needed it. But I think something like that for a game that happened at the start of a generation that was maybe 2 generations ago, and we didn't see anything for it in the next generation, the PS4, Xbox One generation, except for Andromeda. But I think it's good to be able to make that more accessible for people who want to play it new and shiny, for people who want to play it on whatever they're using currently without having to get an old console out. I think that is important, and I don't think it's unreasonable to charge for it either. But there is a question of like, why can't we just use the old thing? Why can't we just be happy with playing Super Mario Brothers? I'm just going to keep coming back to this example.
Sure.
Playing Super Mario Brothers on the NES, or say if you originally bought it on Wii, like, getting the Wii Virtual Console version of that and playing that instead of having to subscribe to NSO to download their subscription model. It feels like because there's hardware, graphics, technology limitations, because all of video games is digital, that it's almost more rife for exploitation in some way, or for rehashing stuff that doesn't necessarily need it.
Yeah. Yes. I feel like it is more, and like I think you and I both know that any development costs money. It costs labor. It's not the click of a button. It takes time and work because you want to make sure what you're putting out isn't bad. But you wonder where I'm going with this. Sometimes when they do this, they do all of this, charge for it, and it is still bad. Mm-hmm. Right? Like look at
like worse than the original, or
like look at the original version of Ocarina of Time that came out on the Nintendo Switch Online.
Yeah.
Like it had,
man, that broke my heart.
Graphical errors, it had bugs, it had a bunch of different stuff, right? You right?
I think I got a duplicate trailer here.
Yeah, it's probably looping. This is RE3. Looks like
Oh,
RE2, but
right,
it's
but
RE3.
it's the same intro. That's funny.
Yeah.
Because it's happening in the same place at the same time on the same night.
Yeah. It's like, you need to put the work in. It needs to be like at minimum the same as the old one, right? And sometimes
it's still a creative effort.
Yes. And it should be for the right reasons, right? Like the moment it came out and we saw the state that it was in, which is not like, it wasn't, the worst thing in the world. You couldn't get past Karuko Village or anything like that, right? It was like, it was just not great.
Yeah.
They should have treated it maybe with more respect, and then immediately, the blinds opened and you saw the reason it was there, and it was to tick a box so that you would give them money for their subscription service.
Totally. And like, they fixed it. They patched it.
Yeah.
Great. Well done. Thank you. Did you only do that because people pressured you for it and you thought maybe no one would notice? Or maybe you thought people would notice and you didn't care?
Or you had a budget that was too small to begin with. And when asked to increase the budget to get this right, you said no.
And it blows back on you because, hey, turns out that really sucked.
Yeah.
It really sucked to play a version that was inferior in almost every way. Like, oh, man. And there are a lot of decisions being made like that.
That wasn't even a remaster, right? And so, going back to the original question about, like, why do we sometimes feel like we need remasters? And it's because sometimes a game, the original is always going to be there in a way, but sometimes the easiest thing in the world to bring people into, like, a loving relationship with the game that everybody else already loves is to remake it in a way that will meet modern standards. I think. Yeah.
It's we talk about, like, cynical, like, development or publishers, but it's not for nothing. I've said this already in this segment, but there's a part of us there that wants it. There's a part of us there that wants shiny old, that wants like, it's part of this is they're giving us what some people want.
And sometimes they give us The Last of Us remastered.
Sorry, do you mean Last of Us Remastered or The Last of Us Part 1?
Sorry, The Last of Us Part 1, the remake.
You mean Last of Us remastered?
Yeah.
I'm gonna be calling it that for until the end of time. It is like when Last of Us Part 1 was announced a month ago, not even, earlier this month. And we were looking at the trailer footage and people say, "Oh yeah, it's remade from the ground up and it's this and it's that." And
That's
I'm
a lie.
looking at it. I'm like, it doesn't. A lot of these are like shot for shot the same. They're using the same assets. They're using the same performance capture. They're using, like, it's going to be the same game.
It's a PS4 game, Gary.
What?
This is a PS4 game running on a PS5. That is the reason it is 1440p, 60 FPS, because it can't push higher than that. Because it's not supported in the engine, because it's a PS4 game.
It could if they wanted it to. Like, if they were going to do this, they could make it happen if they wanted it to. I think that they've chosen not to. Yeah,
but I mean, like, I don't know if this game is not going to come out on PS4. There are people, the people online who knows the validity of it, but like some of the assumption is that this is actually a PS4 game running in, like, a boosted mode.
Well, like, it's a PS4 client with a PS5 patch.
It's not a native PS5 game.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it is just the Last of Us 2 engine. They just put as much of Last of Us 1's assets into the Last of Us 2 engine, like, beat for beat. But yeah, you look at that and it's like, when you are preserving some parts and you're not, like, parts of this game aren't remade, like, new textures, new assets, right? That's impressive. That's good. But some other parts you're leaving completely untouched. That's not remade. It's a weird middle ground. That's why I want to call it a remaster, is because, like,
I'm just going to call it the rehabilitation of Joel Miller.
Rehabilitation of Joel Miller. We'll see. I still think the story as it is, it makes him irredeemable, but that's a conversation for September.
For when that game comes out.
Yeah. Jeremy,
Kerry.
I didn't actually put this ahead of time, which I should have, but what are your top 3 remakes?
So I have 3 that I'm going to bring up. The first one is Halo, which is hilarious considering how much I talk about how much I don't like the anniversary edition of Halo 1.
Halo 1, yeah.
And I'm not just talking about Halo 2. I am including Halo 1 in one of the best remasters I've ever played, specifically because of the ability to swap between them on the fly.
Really? That's fascinating.
I still think that is a absolute master stroke of a decision.
Mm-hmm.
It was not as clean on the 360, granted. You had a black screen for about 2 seconds every time you did it, as the assets had to stream in.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, it running now on the Master Chief Collection, it is a absolute wonderful idea to be able to swap between them, compare them, and then the inclusion of being able to do it in cutscene in Halo 2. How outstanding is that?
It is outstanding. It's such a...
It is such a love letter. It is such a genuine, like, we know how much the original means to you. We're not here to make it, like we're here to try and make it better if we can. But, you know, if you don't want that, the original's still there for you. But
yeah, it's a player-centric decision.
yeah, but like if you wanna compare it, here you go. And you know what? I still think that the version of Halo 2 that they put out is my default. I play that version. I think the version of Halo 2 they put out, the anniversary edition, I think it's outstanding. I think it's excellent.
Halo 2 Anniversary is so good.
Yes. Yeah, I think that is one of the best remakes.
Mm-hmm. For me, off the top of my head, and this is interesting because I haven't played it that much in comparison to how long this series goes for, but Mass Effect Legendary Edition, we brought it up a few times today, but it's so good to see that game modernized and to see it where it is today. I mean, that game, it means a lot to basically everyone who plays it once they get to a certain point. Because you develop such a connection to the characters and to the story and to the world. And the setting, and you just watching this trailer, like getting the trailers ready for having this on the stream today, and just seeing the 5 seconds of gameplay before I copied the link and pasted, I was like, oh shit, I need to play more of this. Like, there's so many cool scenes, cool vistas, moments, cutscenes, like dialogue choices, characters. There's so much that means so much for that game, and it's great that it's just available. It's great that they've done it and done a good job.
I'll be honest with you, Kerry. When the trailer came up, I was like, "Oh, maybe I should go back and actually properly play."
Yeah,
it's so hard to find the time for 3 giant fucking games.
Yeah, man.
It's really hard to find the time. And like that is, I think, the biggest thing that's stopping me, because I know I was really excited to play it. There's a reason I pre-ordered it and bought it on launch, and put it in and sat down and started playing Mass Effect 1. And I started to get into it, but it's just more like I just know how long it's going to be. It's like starting One Piece. Like, you just can't do it sometimes.
It's like, man, I could do so many other things with this time.
It's climbing a mountain to then realize there's 2 even fucking bigger mountains on the other side of it.
Totally. I know exactly what you mean. I will also say there is a fair amount, there is some credence to the idea that maybe if you're not hooked to the point where it becomes the top of your list, and I know you were enjoying one. I know that. And I was enjoying one when I was playing it. But there is a nugget of logic there that says you might be more engaged if you start with 2. It might pull you through.
It's not about being engaged.
Okay.
Because I was in on 1. I'm like, okay. I'm gonna play this game. I'm enjoying. It's like watching early seasons of Star Trek. Like I've had my fair share of slow, drawn out, unrefined sci-fi. I've seen every Star Trek that isn't Deep Space Nine, and not even for me not liking Deep Space Nine, have barely seen it.
Let me ask you this though, Jeremy. When did you start watching that stuff? Did you watch it first, or did you watch it after you were hooked?
I watched it after I mean, like, I had to get hooked, but I got hooked on the original series, which is the hardest one to start.
Right.
But, you know, like, I remember deciding one day I'm just going to sit down and watch every episode of The Next Generation.
Yeah.
And I still haven't done it, but that's only because I'm up to the season where they do the writer's strike and every episode fucking sucks. But, like, it's you know, it's what I've seen is enough. I got to the end in my head.
Jeremy, let me ask you this.
Yes.
What are you playing next?
Like, what's my next game that I'm playing?
You're about to finish Neon White.
It's not Mass Effect.
No.
I'm
just saying, now might be the time. Now might be the time.
It might be Dark Souls 2.
Oh, dude. Oh, what the fuck? You haven't finished Elden Ring. You don't want to do it, Jeremy. I can understand that you want to.
No, my next game is actually Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, you're breaking my heart. That's fine. You got to do you. Don't forget, Jeremy. July 22nd, Live Alive is coming out as well.
Live Alive.
Live Alive. Pardon me. Live Alive.
I am gonna buy that game. That game looks great.
Speaking of remakes or remasters.
Yeah. My next of my top 3 remasters.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it's yours as well. Final Fantasy VII. It's just it's just like it's just an incredible game. It's just a 10 out of 10. 9.5 out of 10, 10 out of 10.
Oh, you take that 0.5 out of your mouth, mister.
Oh, it's a little bit sexist.
Yeah, no, good point.
It's got some trouble.
It does have some trouble.
And look, not the parts that I thought it was going to be. So, you know, that's pretty good for it.
Yep.
But like, it's not. I don't think it's perfect, but it's fucking close.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And I also think it's more than some of its parts. And just we've spoken about Final Fantasy VII. We know about it.
We've spoken about it recently. We spoke about it at the time. We've spoken about it for this segment. But this game currently sitting at the top of my list of favorite games of all time. I can't wait to play more of it. I can't wait to see where the rest of it's going.
Oh, I'm gonna break your heart.
Okay, again.
Yeah.
How many pieces will my heart be in?
I don't know where my play disc is.
Oh, you did tell me that. You told me that your housemate was looking for it.
Yeah, but I looked for it. Like I looked in all the other cases. I don't know where it is.
Oh no, that's a shame.
Yeah, and because I was gonna play it the other day.
Oh, okay. No, that does break. That bit breaks my heart that you didn't get there because you couldn't find it.
Yeah.
Let me see. EB Games, Final Fantasy VII Remake,
not
pre-owned on PlayStation 4, only $36.
Okay.
On sale, down from 44.
Yeah.
I've
got it on digital. I should be able to play it actually.
What do you mean you got it on digital?
Everyone got it on PlayStation Plus.
Yeah, but it doesn't cover you for Remake. It doesn't cover you for Integrate.
I wonder if I could download the game, put in my install disc, and it might think it's the same version. No, because they added it after the fact. They said, yeah, it does now.
Does it?
I think way later. I think they did.
Oh, I don't know about that. Final Fantasy VII.
I'll have to double check.
But point being, this game's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right. Active PS Plus users can upgrade to PS5 version.
Yeah.
Does it come with Integrate? Does it come with Yuffie's chapter?
Doesn't matter. I bought that. It's a different.
Good point.
It's not. It's probably the same SKU.
Okay, so you should just be able to download it then.
Yeah.
It can upgrade. Oh, okay, well that's good.
Do you want to go for your final one or? Because I've got to do my final.
This isn't the one that's my favorite, but it is the other one that I have left, which is Demon Souls. Was that on your list as well?
Well, my final one was Blue Point, just as a studio.
As a cheat answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll say what's good about Demon Souls, and then you can agree with me and talk about Shadow.
Sure.
But Demon Souls is astounding. When you look at footage of the original Demon Souls on PS3, it looks like a good PS1 game at times. Like, it looks so muddy and rough and jagged edged at times.
Yeah.
A good PS1 game is a bit of a stretch. A good PS2 game.
A good PS2 game, yeah.
And to be fair, it was an early PS3 game. That's kind of how generations work.
And
But
especially for the PS3.
it has not aged gracefully in the least. It is not only due to all the accessibility issues we were talking about before in this episode, but man, is it hard to get a hold of, hard to play, and hard to look at.
Yeah.
And the remake is maybe the most beautiful game I've ever seen. And it's been out for 18 months now. There are other games that can come forward and take its place after that much time, you'd think. But it's drop dead gorgeous. It's absolutely astonishing. And it's just bricks and fire and, rats.
Mountains.
But it doesn't matter. They've made it all so beautiful. So stylized and high definition. And
you gotta wait till you get to the Skeleton Islands.
Skeleton Islands.
Yeah.
When the lightning strikes the tree.
When you look up and you see the beast in the sky and you're like, oh my god.
Does that happen in game?
What?
Where you look up and you see a beast in the sky. I thought that was just part of the intro cinematic.
What? Wait, what beast are you talking about?
In the intro cinematic, where there's like skeletons in front of your character, and then along the rampart wall, the big hands, and then the big monster goes like, "Rah!"
No, that's not the beast I'm talking about.
Oh, okay. Great intro cinematic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my answer is yes, Demon Souls and Shadow of the Colossus from Blue Point. I think because they... look, there are some people that complain about some of the things inside of these, and I think that there are some valid complaints in terms of some of the things that they've changed. Wanda's face in Shadow of the Colossus ain't great, but also you barely see it.
Yeah. What's wrong with it?
It's just as ugly. It's just not a good facial model at all, really. And look, that's that's important. He's the character in the game. I think they should have done a better job there, but also the rest of the game is just so fucking good.
Is that the horse?
Huh?
Is that the horse?
No, the guy.
Oh, the guy.
Yeah.
Wanda wanders.
Yes. Aggro is the horse.
That's right.
You should know it's because it's the only word in the game. And yeah, Demon Souls also has, some people complained about certain parts of the game with liberties they took. When you hear them talk about it, you kind of understand that they needed to take liberties because there just wasn't enough detail in the original game in some aspects. And some people say that the liberties they took were incorrect, that's fine if you think that. For me,
those are the comparisons you invite when you undertake a project like this.
Of course. And, they knew that. I'm sure they had that conversation internally as well. That being said, I think just overall, it's just the way to play that game. It's just the way to play those games, honestly. They look incredible, and they really capture the feel of it. I know Shadow of the Colossus front to back. I've played it so many times. I don't play the PS2 version or the PS3 port. I play the PS4 version on my PS5.
Yeah.
If they brought out a PS5 version of it, which ran better and looked better, I'd probably buy it.
Is it still your favorite game ever?
Probably.
Yeah. Neon White hasn't pipped it?
No. Yeah, probably. I don't know. I don't think I don't know if a game will ever get that high. Outer Wilds came close, but I don't think
it might be unreachable.
Yeah. It's just you just can't. So
well, much as I want to talk about Final Fantasy VII more, we really have done that a lot recently, and we're going a little long on this episode, so I think we'll leave it there. But just know that I'm thinking of it at all times. I just need you all to know that.
Barrett and his daughter.
Or the planet. He's thinking of both of those things at all times at once. Although, when he decides to leave his daughter in the city and just leave, you gotta wonder how much he's really thinking about his daughter. But that's, whatever.
He's on a mission.
Uh-huh.
He's determined.
Uh-huh. It's a non-fatherly mission though. It's a selfless mission. But when you are selfless and you have responsibilities, like you're letting the side down. That was a really weird tangent to end with, but
Sure
that's what
was.
we're gonna do. This is the MiniMapCast.